Hello and welcome to HVM's Crypto Corner for Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. Quite a few things to talk about, so let's get started. The Orang Pendek might be Bigfoot species subject to island dwarfism. Ancient elephants might not have been the only species to shrink in this island chain. The islands of Indonesia are home to some of the most curious examples of size extremities in animals, which is credited to an evolutionary phenomenon called island gigantism or island dwarfism, depending on the direction the size goes. This is where the giant Komodo dragon is still found, but the islands also used to be home to tiny elephants and hobbit people who only stood about 3 feet in stature. Some cryptozoologists believe the legends of the Orang Pendek could be attributed to Bigfoot creatures who became isolated on the island chain, and over time became much smaller than their mainland cousins, becoming something of a Littlefoot sister species.
So this cryptid might actually be real, and no, it's not Bigfoot. This cryptid is known as the Orang Pendek from Sumatra, and its name translates to short person from Indonesian. Stories of the Orang Pendek go back decades and decades, with the majority of the sightings coming from the jungle floor. Those who have seen the Orang Pendek say that it looks like a very small human. Although it does have quite a lot of ape-like features, those who have seen it swear that it looks much more like a human being. It's said to be covered in red brownish hair or fur, and it's said to measure approximately 4 to 5 feet tall. It's also described as walking upright on 2 feet, but a very distinguishing feature of the Orang Pendek is its hair. The head of the Orang Pendek isn't covered in the same hair that the rest of its body is. It's actually said to grow hair like a human does from its scalp. But above all, it's said that its face resembles much more that of a human being as well. And as for its body shape, many people reference it as being similar to that of a lightweight boxer. Skeptics will tell you that the Orang Pendek is nothing more than just an orangutan, and this could very well be the case since orangutans do live in Sumatra. But those who have seen the Orang Pendek swear that it's just not an orangutan because the body compositions are completely different. Orangutans are much larger inside, and they have protruding bellies and very long limbs, whereas the Orang Pendek is said to be much smaller in stature, and you can tell right away just by looking at it. And then there's this video. This is just a screenshot. It was taken from a GoPro when motorbikers crossing the Indonesian jungle came across a very strange creature. They had absolutely no idea what it was, but in the full video you can see it just running into the jungle. For the full video, check out my YouTube. I just did a full-length video on the Orang Pendek and along other cryptids that could very well be real. The link is in my bio. Let me know what you guys think.
These creatures were said to stand around 4 or 5 feet tall, walk on 2 legs, and had a tan fur covering their whole body except for their head, which had more human-like hair and more human-like features than a monkey or ape. They are often described as having a body build like a lightweight boxer. The obvious candidate for this cryptid human-like species would be orangutans, which do populate the area and aren't too far off from the physical description of the Orang Pendek and even have a similar name. The root word orang indicates person in the local language, though, so looking at the full translation of the words Orang Pendek means roughly short person. And orangutan translates to forest person. This indicates the local human population felt the need to distinguish between the apes we know that live in the forest and another group of people we still aren't sure exist. Some anthropologists suggest the most likely candidate for the Orang Pendek would be the ancient inhabitants of the island Flores, who we mostly call hobbit people, but are officially known as Homo floresiensis, who stood roughly 3 to 4 feet tall. When did these little people walk the earth? That's something still being hotly debated by researchers. Initially, testing done at the time of discovery placed the human remains as little as 13,000 years old, which would be far too recent to fit nicely in the current understanding of the human family tree. Subsequent testing indicated the remains were far older, so old that it predated known sea travel, making it impossible to explain how they ended up on the island in the first place. there's been so much speculation about what the Orang Pendek are. And of course, we really don't know. And we've heard of the hobbits, the Homo floresiensis. How close is Sumatra to Flores is what I'm wondering. And could it be possible that these species inhabited a series of islands, perhaps? Who knows? Still quite fascinating. Kentucky woman explains why folks shouldn't take Bigfoot sightings too seriously in her town. It's not always Bigfoot. Though there are multiple known hotspots for Bigfoot sightings in this country, the most popular, of course, is the Pacific Northwest, where native groups hold the Sasquatch to be a sacred creature. The second most common is throughout Appalachia, where Bigfoot is known to hide in the mountains from Georgia to Ohio. Other lesser-known Bigfoot stomping grounds include the wilderness of Florida, where the creature goes by the alternate name of skunk ape. Or maybe, like the Florida panther, it's another species altogether. But this Kentucky woman says that you shouldn't take Bigfoot sightings too seriously in her town, Appalachian folklore, traditions, or no, and here's why.
Putting in their newspapers now about Bigfoot. I swear to God, it's the truth. I got this, and I forgot to tell y'all about it, so I'm going to tell y'all about it now. But it says, East Tennessee Bigfoot researchers heading up Letcher in Harlan reports of Black Mountain encounters on the rise. So we're seeing Bigfoot now. They realize that, like, 80% of the people that live in this town are meth heads, right? They see all kinds of shit.
Okay. In this video, a woman holds up local newspaper from her town in Kentucky, scoffing at an announcement printed there for a lecture and conference on Bigfoot sightings. Harlan County in southeastern Kentucky is right there in the heart of Appalachia. Traditionally a coal mining region, this rural area is apparently, according to the newspaper announcement, experiencing a rise in Bigfoot encounters. So, we just believe anybody now? The woman in the video asks, laughing. She has a different explanation for why so many locals are claiming to see the legendary cryptid. 80% of the people in this town are meth heads, he points out. They see all kinds of expletive. While that would certainly explain a few things, after all, altered states of consciousness are known to induce vivid hallucinations of monsters and other kinds of beasts. And though we were unable to find actual statistics as to the rate of methamphetamine addiction in Harlan County, the area, like much of the former coal region, has been devastated by drug use. But more importantly, Harlan, Kentucky held a CryptoCon, not to be confused with blockchain currency, back in 2018 to discuss supernatural creatures like Bigfoot, aliens, and dogmen, not to be confused with the adorable children's comic by Dad Pilkey. It's a Harlan tradition to see the big hairy guy. Yeah. Very interesting, you have to say that much. Are people seeing Bigfoot in that part of the country? It's entirely possible. Kentucky does have a history. Woman speculates how Bigfoot stays hidden in the UK, how it might be related to the deer population. Everybody agrees that Bigfoot creatures must be quite rare. However, estimating their population numbers is a challenging task since there is no concrete scientific evidence to prove the existence of these legendary creatures in the first place. Bigfoot creatures are known by various names such as Sasquatch, Yeti, Yowie, and many others in folklore and legends from different cultures around the world, including stories of similar mysterious creatures in the UK. Despite the lack of conclusive proof, many wonder if these elusive creatures could possibly be hiding in the remote and untamed wilds of the UK.
Does exist in the UK. It is believed that they would be very rare. Most people believe that there couldn't be more than 500 to 1,000 of them. Many people think that the UK is actually too small to be a home for Bigfoot, but it's a lot bigger than you might actually think. Most of Britain is actually wilderness, mountains, countrysides, things like that. so it would be a lot easier for them to hide. One example that supports this hiding theory is actually the deer population in the UK. There are apparently over 4 million deer in the whole of the UK. But ask yourself, how many times have you actually seen a deer? Sure, they're out there, but I think I speak for most of us when I say we don't run into deers very often. If we don't see an animal that we're really familiar with, that exists in such vast quantities in the UK, who's to say that we would be able to find Bigfoot?
Some argue that the UK may not be an ideal habitat for a population of large, unknown primates like Bigfoot due to its relatively small size. However, proponents of the existence of cryptids across the pond point to the fact that the country offers relatively large areas of wilderness, including mountains, forests, and remote countryside that can potentially provide ample hiding places for creatures wishing to avoid detection. An interesting example that supports this theory is the deer population. The British deer population is estimated to be between 2 and 4 million, but one TikToker asks pointedly, how many times have you actually seen a deer? She says most people don't see them very often with such high population numbers. That's becoming a problem for the country. Somebody should probably warn her about the not deer, especially with so many people talking about the Appalachian connection to the Scottish Islands and other parts of the United Kingdom. Now, as I have pointed out in the past, Nick Redfern believes that the Sasquatch that are seen in the UK are actually more paranormal in nature. If that's the case, then I can see how something like that could live in the UK. If that's the case. If you believe in the paranormal Sasquatch. But still, it makes you wonder. It really does make you wonder. Possible Bigfoot spotted in Canadian First Nations territory. It does seem like a good place to hide. Video footage captured in Muskowekwan, First Nation territory in Saskatchewan, has stirred up speculation of a potential Bigfoot sighting. The blurry footage, taken from a significant distance, shows a massive, dark-haired creature moving in a wild, grassy field. What sets it apart from a bear sighting is the creature's unusual upright movement, leading many to wonder if it could be the elusive Sasquatch.
That is, it's not a bear. It stands up.
I'm assuming that's supposed to be it. Are we sure it's not a bear?
I don't know what the fuck that is. It's not a bear. It stands up.
Much of the time, the dark shape could easily be a bear, but as it stands there, it is a particularly bipedal and human movement in the fluidity of the shoulders and arms as it transitions from crouching to standing that a bear can't quite emulate. In the background, dogs can be heard barking in a way that seems overly aggressive and enthusiastic for a human so far in the distance, but on par for a bear or even a Bigfoot. Many Native American and First Nations tribes have folklore regarding a sister species of people who are larger, hairier, and shy away from contact. There are so many Bigfoot creature sightings, in fact, that some have a theory that it may be linked to horseback riding. It makes a bit more of sense that creatures looking to avoid humans would no longer be expecting us on horseback, as most have turned to modern forms of transportation instead. Horses may mask enough human traces to allow for sneaking up on the elusive creatures. or at least getting close enough for a peek before they slip away into the woods. So, is it a Sasquatch? Is it? Who knows? Saskatchewan has had reports. I think I've read about them, a few of them in John Green's book, Sasquatch the Apes Among Us. Maybe it should be called Sasquatchuan. Who knows? Man thinks he has Bigfoot hair sample and wants to know where to have it DNA tested. That's a good question. Advancements in DNA technology have revolutionized scientific research. Yet, sadly, the field of cryptozoology rarely sees results from these breakthroughs. Despite the easy ability to do so, few samples of suspected cryptids are ever tested, leaving a realm of untapped potential for discovery. If people had an easy way to access the science, that is. Where does one take a Bigfoot hair sample for analysis?
We had some strong storms roll through, a lot of high winds, thunder, lightning, and there was a lot of unusual animal noises, screeching and screaming. And this morning I went out into the woods to see what kind of animal it might have been, see what I could see. I found this clump of hair about 7 feet up in a tree, and it's kind of grayish, silky. It's not coarse like you would find from a bear. Now the tracks on the ground were all smeared, so I couldn't see any tracks.
Okay, folks, who can tell me what he is doing wrong? I can tell you exactly what he's doing wrong. He's handling that hair with his bare hands. He's not wearing gloves. You need to wear gloves if you're going to handle something like that. I'm talking about rubber gloves or plastic gloves. He was not handling that hair sample properly. Even if he does manage to get it tested, there could be the human contamination factor because he handled it with his bare hands. A large storm left a man asking the internet where to take what he believes is a sample of Bigfoot hair. A strong storm rolled through one night, and the animal noises he heard were so strange that he took to poking around the next morning to see what it might have been. About 7 feet up a tree, he found a strange clump of hair that he wants to test for evidence of the legendary Sasquatch. The hair is gray, and he describes the texture as silky, unlike the coarse hair one might find on a bear. There were tracks on the ground, but they were too smeared to be helpful. Finding a lab willing to test for Bigfoot anything is likely to be a struggle, as the man who claimed to have a cryptid tooth found out when he wanted DNA answers. He asked for DNA, but he got an NDA instead, allegedly making it difficult for him to speak about the results. Japanese scientists still seem to have such reservations, as they recently tested their mummified quote-unquote mermaid to see if they could determine its true nature. Unfortunately, its nature was mostly paper and cloth connected to some fish remains. Well, I know that Todd Disotell is someone who would be willing to test DNA of possible Sasquatch. But it does not come cheap. It ain't free. Testing can, depending on what kind of sample it is and how good the sample is. Testing, oh wait, the other thing he did wrong, number one, he was handling it with his bare hands. Number two, he should have had it in a paper bag. Instead of exposing it to the elements. He should have had a paper bag, taken it out of the paper bag, wearing plastic gloves. Or a paper envelope, whatever. A large envelope, I imagine. But like I say, Todd Disotell will test that sort of sample. Depending on how good the sample is, although I question its value now that it's been exposed to the elements, and there is a possibility of contamination. Testing can be anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000, and sometimes higher than that. So if this guy's got $3,000 to $4,000, maybe he can get it tested. But I guarantee there's going to be the human contamination factor. And yeah, it was found 7 feet up in a tree. That would seem to negate any other kind of animal that could come through there. But it could have blown into the tree from somewhere else. There was a storm the night before. So, really, you have to wonder about the value of something like this. Especially if it's contaminated. And it's got the human contamination on it. So just something to consider. Possible Bigfoot caught running across a field on a drone camera. Looks too fast to be human. Will civilian drones be how we finally prove the existence of Bigfoot? A new drone video circulating social media seems to show a bipedal creature sprinting across an open plain far too fast to be a human. It is not definitively stated where the video was captured, but some speculate it may be Australia due to the label of Yowie along with Bigfoot and Sasquatch. Now, first of all, I think that looks too much like a human running pattern. It doesn't look like it's much any faster than, let's say, a long-distance runner might be able to run. Aboriginal Australians have told stories of the Yowie for centuries, describing it as a large ape-like creature that roams the wilderness. Many of these stories tell of encounters with the creature, often accompanied by eerie howls or other strange noises. These legends are remarkably similar to Native American legends of Sasquatch and many other indigenous folklore around the world. These tales are so common that even Dr. Jane Goodall, one of the world's leading primatologists, believes the existence of an undiscovered, large, intelligent primate species to be possible. Drone sightings and wildlife cameras capture some of the most compelling footage of potential Bigfoot creatures, seemingly able to catch them by surprise or even completely unaware. Some cryptozoologists suspect that they are able to detect human activity and avoid it, with some even hypothesizing that hunts for the legendary cryptid may be better conducted on horseback and in silence to hide human presence. Skeptics suggest that if this footage is from Australia, that it could be a kangaroo shown in the video. The long shadow could be creating the optical illusion of running, even when what is actually occurring is the surprisingly swift hops of a kangaroo on the run. These large marsupials can move much faster than humans, but are at least bipedal adjacent as they travel on their powerful hind legs adapted specifically for leaping. And it could be a kangaroo. It could very well be. I personally do not think this is a Sasquatch or a Yowie. This is my personal opinion. I think it's probably, it could be a kangaroo. Or it could be a person in a suit. So, but what do you guys think? Now here's something interesting. Police officer confesses to killing Bigfoot family on deathbed. He says it's haunted him and his fellow hunters all their lives. It's easy for those who have never had strange experiences to dismiss them as tall tales, hysteria, or even hallucinations. For decades, the government insisted that anyone who said they saw a UFO was lying, until they finally admitted that, yeah, there are definitely unidentified aerial phenomena out there. Similarly, many serious people claim to have caught sight of mermaids, ghosts, or even Bigfoot. They can't all be making it up, right?
Plus the driver, me, and the observer, it probably took 4 magazines from all of us to put it down. Full auto. I know I emptied a full magazine, 30 rounds. Well, it's 29. You don't ever put the whole 30 in there. But I put 29 into him, chest and head. And then the gunner, the observer, he had the 2 juveniles, and then my driver, who was out front, he had the mama. And we're not sure we killed her all the way, but it's been something else, man. My driver, he killed himself about 4 years ago. Yeah.
Why? Because of that, you think?
Heavily drinking, bad marriage. But I would say probably, Charlie, it was because I'm going to tell you something. When you see those things, man, they change your. It's more than just. I mean, it changes.
Visit our YouTube channel for the full interview.
In this clip, we hear the confession of a police officer in Fort Knox, Kentucky, who admits that years ago in 1989, he and his co-workers killed an entire Bigfoot family after coming upon a group of them trying to get one of their own out of a bear trap. The story is quite disturbing, with the man discussing exactly how many rounds he fired into the animal, and which members of his team went after the juveniles and the mama. He explains that the trauma he experienced after this event was worse than the PTSD he experienced in the Army. What's worse, he goes on to explain that one of his former co-workers ended up taking his own life, as when you see those things, it changes you. According to this testimony, afterwards, when they were taken to a hospital, forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement about what they saw, and were questioned by government officials, he says the officials called it the creature. What made you decide to tell this story, the interviewer asks. I had stage 4 cancer, the gentleman replies. In fact, this report ended up being a deathbed confession, as a few months later the gentleman died of terminal lung cancer. Could this guy have been telling the truth? Did he and a group of others kill a family of Sasquatch in Kentucky? The interviewer was Charlie Raymond, by the way. That's the Charlie that he was referring to. That's the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization. Could the story be true? I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss it. I think Charlie believes it to be true. We may never know one way or the other, unless there's some bodies found at the area where the killing happened, or allegedly happened. Or some bones or something like that. Very interesting, I have to say that much. Despite all the evidence, the giant squid was cryptid until 2004. Never forget. It shouldn't be surprising that ancient Vikings, known for their sailing prowess and exploration, would have been experts on marine life and exotic animals found on their travels, and yet historians have doubted their accounts of many animals we are now discovering to be actually quite accurate. The kraken was known to appear off the Norwegian coast and was put on maps along with whales and other sea creatures of note, but for some reason historians found these maps and decided only half of these creatures were real. The kraken didn't make the cut, at least not until the 21st century, when 2 different species were scientifically proven beyond doubt.
legendary tentacled sea monster, it's not real. It's from Scandinavian folklore. The first written account comes from 1180. It takes a variety of forms in some of the earliest descriptions. A lot of them do have arms or tentacles or a beard. The image of the Kraken gradually solidified into the squid-like creature that we all know about, especially after a Danish bishop wrote it up in his Natural History of Norway in 1752. He described it as round, flat, full of arms, could pull the largest of warships down to the depths, had a circumference of over 1.5 miles, could be mistaken for a mountain, and it was likely that no man had ever seen its entire body. He was basing his accounts on eyewitness descriptions, which leads us to ask, what's up with these eyewitnesses? They just had their minds blown by an actual giant squid. Its eyes are the size of dinner plates, and the longest one measured by scientists was 43 feet long, which is big, but not take down a warship big. Scholars think that these giant squid sightings morphed into Kraken tales because these sailors in the 1600s were encountering something entirely alien. Any giant squid that they did see at the surface would have been dead or dying, which makes them look even weirder. And then we all know in any good fishing story, there's a liberal dose of exaggeration. Here's where the Kraken passes from myth to science. In 1853, a really big carcass washes up on a beach in Denmark. Sadly for science, the whole thing gets cut up for bait, but a naturalist is able to recover the beak. He analyzes squid and Kraken stories going back centuries, combines those descriptions with the beak, and is able to scientifically name and describe the giant squid. This is the first photograph of a giant squid. This one was caught in the nets of some Canadian fishermen in 1874. They took it to a Presbyterian reverend and amateur naturalist. He paid them $10 for the specimen, draped this in his bathtub to get the photo. Then he passed the specimen to a Yale zoologist who published the world's first accurate illustrations and description of the giant squid. In the 150 years since it was first described, most of our knowledge about the giant squid has come from dead or dying specimens. It wasn't photographed alive in its natural habitat until 2004, wasn't captured on video in its natural habitat until 2012. We weren't even sure how they hunted until very recently. Were they active hunters or ambush predators? Did they hunt by scent or sight? Researchers captured footage a couple years ago that shows a giant squid hunting primarily by sight and actively stalking its prey. We still don't fully understand how they reproduce or their exact range and distributions. Scientists still disagree about how long they can live and exactly how big they can get. So while the giant squid is not the mountain-sized man-eater from the legends, it's still pretty enigmatic. And there's an even more elusive colossal squid.
The earliest known references to the Kraken have some inconsistent descriptions, but usually feature something explained like arms or tentacles with the giant squid or octopus iconography, solidifying in the 1700s credited to the book The Natural History of Norway, which described them as round, flat, full of arms, could sink the largest of warships, has a circumference of over 1.5 miles, and suggested nobody had ever seen one in entirety. This was almost certainly describing the giant squid, but perhaps with some size conversion errors. Size misunderstandings were quite common before a standardized measuring system was introduced. Imagine future archaeologists reading something described as 3 bust lengths but not having found any buses yet, and that explains a lot of size descriptions in historical accounts. Not to mention that buses come in a pretty wide variety of sizes. Giant squids are believed to grow to a maximum size of about 43 feet. However, there is a higher than usual probability of error due to the small number of scientifically documented samples. Not only are these monsters of the deep hard to find, they are also notoriously difficult to preserve and even more unlikely to fossilize. Many reports of washed-up specimens have occurred over the years, but would decay too fast to be considered scientifically documented. It wasn't until the early 2000s when science deemed enough evidence to prove the existence of the giant squid, and they immediately discovered that there were, in fact, 2 distinct species of enormous squid. There is still very little information known about these fierce deep-sea predators. We have no idea what the population numbers might be. We don't know their range or distribution. We don't know how long they can live, or even how big they can really get. Some of what is claimed to be known is also based on other squid species. It is assumed to be true of the giant squid as well, such as reproduction, which leaves much room for inaccuracies. There is currently an ongoing Antarctic expedition for the colossal squid. However, even they acknowledge the slim odds of being able to find even one. Well, I know that Doug Hychek managed to get footage of a giant squid back maybe it's 2004 footage that they're talking about, or was it his in 2006? I can't remember if it was 2004 or 2006. But it's true, it was encrypted until 2004, basically. With only dead species being examined, not live species. But as the video pointed out, we still don't know everything there is to know about giant squids. So they are still pretty enigmatic and pretty mysterious. Artificial intelligence used to create legend stabilization of the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot footage. A still image from the newly released video. Rowan Chung, Twitter. Rowan Chung, author of artificial intelligence AI newsletter The Rundown, posted a stabilized video of the famed Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot footage to Twitter on March 30th that he said was the product of AI. Experts used AI and computer vision to stabilize viral footage of the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film from 1967, Chung said. The footage was originally shot by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin on October 20th, 1967, near Bluff Creek in Northern California's Six Rivers National Forest. And that's the footage. It's only, apparently it's only a few seconds, only about 9 seconds. But still quite interesting. While video experts have been using software like Adobe After Effects to stabilize the footage for over a decade, this represents the first known attempt to do so utilizing AI. This latest iteration of the Patterson-Gimlin footage has people once again forming opinions on its validity and entrenching themselves as believers or debunkers. Some viewers of the footage insist that the creature captured on camera is simply someone in a suit, while others naturally believe it to be a genuine Bigfoot. Very little has changed over the years in the debate regarding the film. Since its introduction over 50 years ago, the film has remained a divisive subject in the cryptozoological community, with some, like famed cryptozoologist Bernard Hoylemans, arguing that the Bigfoot is likely to be a person in a suit. Hoylemans argued that the creature's hair flow pattern was too uniform. The hair on his breast was inconsistent with primate physiology, its buttocks were insufficiently separated, and its reaction to the presence of Patterson-Gimlin was too calm. Well, this mean, as brilliant of a guy as Bernard Hoylemans was the line from Jaws that Quint said? Sometimes referring to Richard Dreyfuss's character, Hooper. Well, it tells me one thing, Mr. Hooper. It tells me that you scientific experts don't have the temerity to admit when you're wrong. I realize I'm paraphrasing what Quint said, but still. And I have to agree with that, too, by the way. Other experts, like Esteban Sarmiento, a specialist in physical anthropology at the American Museum of Natural History, were more favorable in their evaluations. I did find some inconsistencies in appearance and behavior that might suggest a fake, but nothing that conclusively shows that this is the case, he wrote of the footage. Patterson and Gimlin were said to have screened the film for Dale Sheets, head of the documentary film department at Universal Studios, along with several technicians for the studio, after which they concluded that any suit capable of replicating the creature in the film would be incredibly expensive and difficult to produce. Disney executive Ken Peterson conveyed a similar sentiment after watching the film, asserting that Disney's technicians would be unable to replicate it. Overall, the number of experts who have examined the evidence and found it to be intriguing is at least equal to the film's detractors, and all claims of proof that it was a person in a suit have since been debunked, leaving the film still unexplained. For their part, both Patterson, now deceased, and Gimlin have consistently maintained that the film is genuine. So, the thing about the PG film, and I could go on and on about the PG film all day. I won't, but I could. It's been such a divisive subject for over 50 years now that we may never know one way or the other whether it was genuine or not. I personally believe it is. And I think that Bill Munns has made the case for that. He made it pretty strongly. Still, there's always the possibility that we could all be wrong about the footage. And John Bindernagel, the late John Bindernagel, said it best. He said, "Getting into that film just gets you into a whole bunch of he said, she said." And it's true. That's why I myself don't discuss the PG film very often on this show. And I have to agree with Dr. Bindernagel when he said that we should just put that film aside for now and focus on the other evidence, especially the tracks. And then maybe come back to the footage. And once the actual discovery of Sasquatch is made, then we can look at that film and say what we know about Sasquatch is in that film as well. But still, quite an interesting article. Finally, mystery creature photographed by trail cam in Texas stumps wildlife officials. What the heck is this? It looks a bit like a wolverine, but I don't think there's any wolverines in Texas. A peculiar trail cam photo of a mysterious creature caused something of a stir over the weekend after bewildered wildlife officials in Texas shared the picture online and indicated that they could not identify the animal. The strange concession came about this past Thursday when the Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park posted the image on their Facebook page. "We're scratching our heads trying to identify this elusive creature," they declared, explaining that the picture was a game camera photo of a mystery animal lurking in the Rio Grande Valley. The department went on to speculate that it could be a new species or an escapee from a nearby zoo, before turning the proverbial guessing game over to people on social media. The weird photo quickly went viral and, as one might imagine, spawned all manner of theories as to the nature of the curious critter. Some of the more fantastic suggestions from observers were a capybara, a nutria, a wolverine, two boards moving in opposite directions. I think it should be boars, not boards. And of course, the requisite paranormal suspects, including aliens or a chupacabra. That said, among those many possibilities put forward by people online, an answer to the mystery seemingly emerged as, later in the weekend, The Departed updated their post, marveling at the attention it had received and indicating that we agree with most of the comments that this is very likely an American badger. Like I said, I thought wolverine, perhaps. But it's entirely possible it could be a badger. It has the dark markings on the face, which badgers do have. Yeah, I suspect it is a more mundane animal. I said wolverine, but there are no wolverines in Texas. Wolverines tend to stay up north. So what the heck is this? Who knows? Also want to note that Australian Yowie researcher Rex Gilroy passed away, unfortunately. Not sure how old he was, but he was up there in years. He was well known for being interested in all kinds of paranormal subjects, including the Yowie of Australia. So, rest in peace, Rex. And finally, the new issue of the Bigfoot Times newsletter is all about Peter Byrne. I recommend getting a copy of that newsletter if you don't have it. It's really good stuff. It's really in depth about some Peter Burns stories that have come from the past, written by Joe Bielart, who's a good friend of Peter's. All the stories come from various books of Peter Burns. So, like I said, I highly recommend everybody check it out. If you can get a hold of a copy of the April 2023 issue. Really good stuff. And that's going to do it for this week. I want to thank you very much for tuning in. You guys are the heart of the show. I always say that, but I always mean it. I'll continue to do this as long as you guys want me to. And hey, until next week, y'all be good or be good at this Space Crypto Corner.